Hey guys, I just want to bring up an opportunity for resource investors. If you want to rub elbows with the big wigs and talk to companies directly that are handpicked by Rick Rule, well, you got to be in Boca Raton from July 7th to 11th for the Rick Rule Symposium. The event has become a premier event in the mining space, and they're going to have some pretty big speakers like Robert Friedland, Sean Rusin, and the great Rick Rule. And also, we're going to be there. You can meet the Deep Dive team in person. So if you're interested in rubbing elbow with some of the biggest heavy hitters in junior mining, check out the link below. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Adrian O'Brien from Midnight Sun. Guys, I find this story really interesting because they are searching for copper in Zambia, right next to the Kamoa-Kakula project, which is owned by Ivanhoe Mines. But they're also interesting because one of their projects, the Dumbwa target, is backed by KoBold Metals, who is backed by Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, which is a really interesting mining AI company that you've probably been reading about if you've been following the mining space. But also on some of the other projects that Midnight Sun has, we have a partnership with First Quantum, who owns and operates the Kananchi mine that is in Zambia, that is looking for some oxide material that just might possibly be able to come from one of their targets. So we got a company here that is in a great location to find copper as we enter what looks like a pretty big copper shortage, and they've got some pretty interesting partners that are worth discussing. And also, as you'll probably find from watching this interview, Adrian is a really great speaker at articulating what the company has going on. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Adrian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Steve, appreciate it. Glad to be on.
So your background, it looks like you're joining us from a Philadelphia cheese commercial, or I don't know if you remember those from the 90s, or from heavens, the heavens, from the clouds.
We'll go with the heavenly one. I'm you know what, I'm all about the 90s throwbacks. So maybe the Philly cheese commercial is where it's at.
So you guys have a lot of exciting stuff going on over at Midnight Sun, and we thought it'd be great to have you guys on. Firstly, you're the first company we've talked to that's done a deal with KoBold. So I've been reading about them online for a long time. Don't know too much about them. So I thought we could maybe start by talking a little bit about the role that AI is playing in mining. AI is obviously a really hot theme, and we've seen some companies in the public markets that have done stuff or claim to have been doing stuff in the AI world. Now, obviously, when we're talking about KoBold and their backers, I would assume that they're doing very, very real things. What can you tell us about the role that AI is playing in mining right now?
Well, I think it's really interesting. You know, I look at the mining industry. I'm in my 27th year in this business, and I look at mining, and I think about the continuum from the day that I got into the business through to today, running companies, being around different projects, and looking at how companies have moved projects ahead. And I think you have to look at mining in terms of the investment world, right? Look at who you're competing with and what else is out there and what's attracting investors, particularly generalists, particularly younger investors. And I think one of the biggest hurdles the mining company has always had in terms of moving things forward is the amount of time it takes to move our projects ahead. I mean, you're looking at 5 to 10 years. And when you look at the attention span of most investors nowadays, and you look at, you know, what is needed to gather the requisite amount of information to move a project from discovery stage to development stage to production stage and all this stuff, it's immense. It's slow. It's kind of painful, to be perfectly blunt. And then you compare it to other industries that happen so quickly. You know, somebody makes a discovery or some particular thing happens, and that propels that company forward so quickly, whether you're cannabis or whether it's a tech deal or whatever it may be. And so you have to think that the mining industry is one of those few industries that has done very little to try and kind of really, you know, become more technologically advanced in terms of the speed at which they can get things done. And AI is doing that. So now all of a sudden you have this tool that can come in and it works in different ways. It's not as simple as just speeding up the process, but by way of knocking out targets that aren't worthwhile, you know, zeroing in more quickly. Now all of a sudden you can move a project that would have taken 10 years and move it forward maybe 3 or 4. And that's what KoBold's doing. And that is super exciting. And I think that's going to remove one of the biggest barriers to getting people to want to invest in mining.
what I sort of think about when I think about AI and its applications with mining is that with certain projects, there's just tons of drilling. You've got your neighbors that have done tons of drilling. And if you're lucky, they've put out a bunch of that information in their marketing materials and you have access to that. And you can kind of feed all those different,
Sure.
you know, all the different geophysics that exist in the area, the geochem that's publicly available, and any of the historic data you have. You're feeding that all into a machine, and that's going to sort of help you identify sort of targets. Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you think the bigger the data set you have, the more you can feed into that AI and you can get more, drill down more quickly, right? But what it also does, and I think this is something that KoBold explains really well, and I did a presentation in Washington, D.C. about a month ago with Daniel Enderton from KoBold, and he explained this beautifully. They can take a target and they can take the data set, and let's say you drill, you're going to drill 100 holes. They can get more data out of 5 holes than they could out of 100. They can go in, and maybe I'm exaggerating those numbers, but the point being they can take a very small amount of drill holes, and by simply assaying for more metals, and by simply taking, borehole surveys and data from the downhole portion of this thing, they've got the opportunity to get down there and get more data. They can take that data, run it through, and what it does more than anything else is it eliminates targets that aren't worth chasing. So rather than go out and just think of like, oh, we've got vast amounts of data, now we can sort through all of it at lightning speed, it's really about getting rid of the stuff that would otherwise waste 5 years of exploration work, get down to the ones that matter, and then go after them right away. And so it's kind of like eliminating all the false positives, and you're getting rid of all this wasteful data and wasteful time that would otherwise bog companies down.
Okay, so let's talk about Midnight Sun,
Sure.
which is the company that you're here to represent. You guys have projects in Zambia and the Congo.
Just Zambia.
Just the Zambia-Congo copper belt.
That's right. Yeah, the Zambia-Congo copper
but
belt. We're wholly on the Zambia side. We don't. We haven't delved into the Congo side at all.
Okay, so and I find it interesting just because I was having a chat with Rick Rule a couple of weeks ago, and I brought up a bunch of the copper juniors that exist in the Canadian junior markets, and he said to me, "Well, they're all shit." And I think that really what he meant is all of these companies that we see that have historic copper drilling in Canada and the US. It's generally, if there's something there, it's being explored. Otherwise, it's low probability that you're actually going to find something. Then we think about one of the last major copper projects to go into production. That's of course Robert Friedland's project in the Congo. So what can you tell us about the company? My understanding is that one of your projects, you have a deal with KoBold, and then the other projects, or at least 2 of them, you have a deal with First Quantum. Can you maybe walk us sort of through what that sort of what those structures look like, and ultimately, not to load this question too much, then maybe we can get into sort of why you're excited about the area.
Yeah, totally. And just to quickly tap on what Rick was saying, I'll have to chat with him about Midnight Sun. We haven't talked about it yet at any length. And I think what's really interesting, and he's not wrong. Most of the copper projects out there right now, I think what the public has to understand is that copper projects in particular come with such a vast amount of upfront capital, right? The capex on these things can be astronomical, multi-billions of dollars, 3 million, 4 million, 5, 8 even. And when you start to look at that, and you look at a junior company, what is the probability of a junior raising $5 billion to put a project into production? It's almost zero. The chances are so slim, it's ridiculous. And then when you start to look at the deposits that people are developing now, Rick's right. The low-hanging fruit's been picked. So now what we're down to is projects that are much, much tougher, much more expensive, that come with a really high capex. And you'll hear the phrase block cave being thrown around a lot. This is a certain style of underground mining. And it works really well in certain situations. But what it requires is all the capital right up front. So if your capex is $5 billion, it's not spread out over 10 years, it's $5 billion in year one. So, or $3 billion in year one. I mean, it's absolutely atrocious and super difficult to do. So the low-hanging fruit's been picked. When people are looking in areas like BC, Ontario, Quebec, southern US, and they're looking at copper projects, they're typically looking at things now that, since the easy ones that are near surface have been found, they might be big, but they're deep, they're hard to get at, they're going to take really intricate, unique mining plans to make them work, and they're going to take an absolute ton of cash. So you have to be looking in places that have something that, is critical in terms of mass. So they have to have scale, they have to have scalability, they have to have grade, there has to be infrastructure. And I think the key is getting away from porphyry deposits, unless they're very large and they're in the absolute right jurisdiction, but getting into SEDEX or stratabound deposits. And that's what you're seeing at Kamoa-Kakula, which is Ivanhoe's deposit you mentioned. That's what you're seeing at First Quantum's Kansanshi mine, Sentinel, Lawana. This is the Domes region. This is Zambia, and that's why Midnight Sun is where we are. So it's really critical. You got to be in the right place.
So we're seeing it with lots of projects around the world right now. Like one that often gets mentioned is Cobre Panama, also a First Quantum company, and what happened to them. And that would have been a massive copper project. I think it was said that it would have made up 3% of the world's copper and 10% of Panama's GDP, and they still wouldn't let it move forward.
Yeah.
And then we hear about Zambia, a country that, I'll be perfectly frank with you, I don't really know anything about. I'm not even certain that I could locate it on a map. How, if I'm a potential investor and I'm looking at this company, how do I get comfort with the political risk that exists when investing in a country that I don't know a whole lot about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's tricky, right? You hear a lot about Africa, you hear a lot about investing in Africa, and you hear these kind of nightmare stories. Panama, Cobre to Panama, that is your worst case scenario. This is the thing that everybody's afraid of. But if you look at Africa, not all countries are created equally. So there are some really tough countries. There's some super scary countries. There's places like Niger or Sudan. But there's places like Zambia, like Namibia, that are an absolute breeze to work in. These are very developed countries. If you look at Zambia just as a simple measurement of what they've done, this is a country that's very developed, that's very forward-thinking, has a democratically elected government. It's been a mining powerhouse for 100 years. They're the second largest copper-producing district in the world, and 75% of their export earnings are copper. Like they have a proper mining act in place. They're moving projects ahead. You're not stuck with a lot of bureaucratic nonsense. So those places are where people are going to move things forward. And that's a reason why Rio Tinto, Barrick, First Quantum, Anglo, Barrick is turning into now a big copper producer. And where are they working? Zambia. Where are they focused? Right beside us. And the reason is, it's just an area, it's a country that's super easy to work in, and it's an area where you can find very big deposits that can move forward very quickly. That's really what it's about. So, I mean, in terms of removing the barriers to entry as far as investors would be concerned, Zambia is one of the best places on the planet right now. And I think if you asked everybody on our team, they would rank it as one of the absolute top places in the world to be working. It's top notch.
So I look at some of the copper grades here that you guys have hit at the Mitsu target, which is with First Quantum. What can you tell me about the geology? You said that it's not a porphyry. I'm not a geologist, and I know that a lot of our audience aren't either. Can you maybe walk us through the type of deposit and sort of how it looks from are we talking open pit? What does it kind of look like from a mining operation standpoint? Should you be able to get to production?
Sure, totally. So there's actually two different things. So if you look at our property, right, our property is very large. It's over 500 square kilometers, so it's big. And because of the underlying geology, every deposit in the area, whether it's Barrick's Lawana mine or First Quantum's Kansanshi mine, they're all formed around these things called a basement dome. There's kind of geological structures that these big deposits form around. And these deposits are typically very shallow. And the easiest way I explain it to people is almost like a coal seam, if anybody's ever seen one of those. And they're kind of 10 to 15 meters thick, maybe up to 20 meters thick. They're usually pretty flat. They might tilt a little bit underground, but they're like a big flat layer that goes for kilometers and kilometers. And so it makes them very easy to mine. It makes them simple. These are open pit mines. They're not underground mines. Typically, I mean, Kansanshi is getting far along in their process now. They're 20 years in. They're starting to go underground a little bit. But the reality is you remove the barrier to entry of that super high upfront cost and even the high capex overall. So, these are deposits that sit and form in a big layer that's near surface, and they're very easy to mine from a comparative basis. When you look at the case of our property, we actually have two different things going on. So our property, if you almost took it and split it into 4 even pieces, each of those 4 pieces is a target for a deposit. And if you look at the area, every deposit that surrounds us is 1 billion tons. So when you think about copper deposits, you generally hear companies talking in the hundreds of millions of tons, 100 million, 200 million, 300 million. Billion-ton deposit is absolutely gigantic. It's a multi-generational deposit. In this area called the Domes region of Zambia, every single deposit's 1 billion tons. Lumwana's 1 billion tons. First Quantum's Kansanshi mine's 1 billion tons. Sentinel's 1 billion tons. Kamoa-Kakula is 1.4 billion tons. And Kamoa is almost 3% copper. So these are astronomically big deposits. And then when you look at our property, we have the potential to host more than one of those. So unlike most of the other ones, we've got all these different systems that are unique. And so what we're doing with KoBold is we're working on one target that is specific to that model of one of these billion-ton, they're called a SETX deposit, so a billion-ton SETX deposit. That's what we're aiming at finding. And we have every reason to believe that there's a big system there. So that target is garnering a lot of attention from a lot of people for good reason. And then we're also working with First Quantum at, you mentioned Me2, and Me2 is actually a different kind of mineralization called oxide copper. And that is stuff that sits right at surface, and it's only in the first 50 to 60 meters of depth. And it's basically excavator mining. If we find it, we'll be able to take that material off the surface and move it to Kansanshi mine and let First Quantum process it. Basically sit back with a revenue share, and that's what we're working on that one.
What's the deal structure with First Quantum? How much could you guys end up owning of this company if you guys keep hitting and this eventually gets to production? Based on the deal terms right now, how much would Midnight Sun end up owning?
So First Quantum's a really interesting thing. We don't actually have a deal that's formal yet with First Quantum in terms of what we're doing around the actual mining part of it. But what we're doing with them is we have what we're calling a cooperative exploration plan. And to kind of make it so you can understand why we're doing it, I'll give you a little context on how their operation works. So they have the Kansanshi mine. It's Africa's top producer. And they have multiple different circuits there that they're using to mine the material that they have. But predominantly, they have a sulfide circuit. So that's the SETX deposit I'm talking about. And they're mining that. That's their primary operator. But then what they have is they have the most efficient copper smelter on the planet at Kansanshi. That was built a number of years ago. They've been in operations there for like 20 years. And that copper smelter produces about 1.2 million tons or 1.3 million tons of sulfuric acid a year. So that's a big environmental liability, right? And then if you look at mines that use sulfuric acid for production, heap leach operations, that's generally your biggest cost. But they needed to find a way to get rid of that acid. And so they've been using oxide copper, same stuff I talked about being on our property that's at surface. They've been using that oxide copper and they've been heap leaching it with their free acid and getting rid of the acid that way. But what they've also been doing is unlocking cathode copper from that they can concentrate and sell as a separate product. And it earns them, let's call it 200 to 400 million a year as a byproduct, which is incredible. And they've been doing that for years and years and years, but they've depleted their oxide sources at First Quantum's Kansanshi mine, and they are in dire need of new oxides. The problem is there is no more oxides at Kansanshi. There's no more oxides in the surrounding area. The only property where there's oxides nearby is us. And so we have a lot of oxides at Kaziba. We have a lot of oxides at Me2. So Kaziba's 6 kilometers away from the Kansanshi mine, like very, very close by. And it's very high grade compared to what they were running there. So basically we've partnered up with them. And what they're going to do is they're going to work with us geologically, supply a geological team. They're going to help us with the drill plan and how we approach the drilling there. And then they're going to run all the assaying and met work will be done at Kansanshi. And so that's going to speed the process up. And we figure that we can develop some kind of resource that can go into the Kansanshi mine inside of 4 to 5 months. And that we could actually have material going to Kansanshi and running through their mill, SXEW plant, which is that circuit that is dedicated to oxides, inside of 12 months. And we'll have a revenue share of that, but allow them to do the work. So it's really an ultimate situation for near-term cash flow.
So if I'm looking at it as an investor, and there's a lot of exciting stuff here. You guys have what looks like to be a gigantic deposit, but you've got this shark that you're swimming with, who you're going to hopefully do a deal with and make a lot of cash flow. But we still don't know the deal terms. How do I get comfort with that if I'm an investor, that I know that that First Quantum's not going to ultimately take advantage of Midnight Sun in terms of being able to structure a deal?
Well, I would look at it this way. First of all, we've always looked at it as simply a byproduct that happens to be on our property. There's no downside to us. We're going to do some drilling there, and we're going to prove up whatever material is at surface at Kaziba to go to their mine. The cost to us is $1 million. It's 4 months of drilling. Underneath that, we have a big SETX target similar to the one we're working on with KoBold. We own that 100%, and that isn't going to change. And we're not giving up any percentage of our property to First Quantum. We have another target called Crunch that sits right down below that. And then we have a third target called Me Too, and we own those 3 targets 100%. On top of that, we have the deal with KoBold at Dumbois that we're working on and moving forward. So there's no material change to the value of our property and what we're going to do to move these forward. But basically, we've just thrown an opportunity on the table to develop near-term cash flow that would fund everything we're talking about doing for the duration of this property and the development of this property until the point that we sell it with absolutely no dilution to Midnight Sun. So the downside, something doesn't work and we continue on our original path, and we have this giant program going on with KoBold, the best geological team on the planet, the backing of people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and all these folks that are invested in KoBold. And if it works, we're making, serious cash flow within 12 months, moving a target forward that's going to fund all of the exploration work we need to do. So there's really no downside. There's only upside to be gained, and it's very, very significant. And it amounts to basically a situation where we have the best of both worlds. And I think it's one of the most overused buzz phrases in our industry. But really, if you have a near-term cash flow, turnkey mining operation and big exploration targets, that is literally the best of both worlds.
So you've had some success raising money in the past. I get the sense here that you don't work on tiny things, based on just chatting with you pre-interview and some of the stuff that you've worked on. I know that it's been a tough time for people to raise money in the Canadian junior markets over the last couple of years. What is it that you're doing differently versus all these other guys who are struggling to raise money right now? How is it that you think about a project when you take something on that you think you have a shot to go raise the money that you need to raise, and more importantly, not raise that money and have it ultimately be dead money for the investors you get that money from?
Absolutely. I think it comes down to a few different things. When I'm looking at a project to get involved with, the first thing I look at is a team. Who are they? What have they done? I spent a large portion of my career working with Mark O'Day at Oxygen Capital. And I've known the CEO of this company for 20 years. And when I look at the track record of those individuals, they find big projects. They find mines that end up going into production. And at the end of the day, the asset is crucial. I mean, you have to have something that really has the criteria that could move it ahead, that could be globally impactful. And I think that's the difference here. When you're looking at what Midnight Sun is working on, and you nailed it right off the top in this interview. You said, if you look at what Rick Rule was saying about projects all over the place, sure, people are having trouble financing them because the smart money is looking at them and realizing that they don't actually have what it takes to get to the finish line. So you have to take on projects that are. And when I looked at Midnight Sun and getting involved with what this project is and what we're doing now, this is a project that actually has what it takes to get to the finish line, and in an area that has the infrastructure, that has the big players involved, and also we're not arm waving that we're going into production here. The reality is the exit plan for Midnight Sun is a sale. It's M&A. We want to build this asset to the point where we can sell it to someone else and obviously create a big return for our shareholders. But I think telling a story that makes sense, telling it in an impactful way, communicating the story properly, and making sure that people understand that you really have the goods, and then building a property and a package that does have what it takes. That's the big differentiator. And there is a lot of fluff out there. So people are getting really good at finding their way through that and identifying the things that make those projects not work. And I think that's really the big hurdle to raising money right now.
So last question, if I am a potential investor looking at investing, or I am an investor already invested, and I want to evaluate management over the remainder of 2024, what am I looking out for in terms of milestones, important sort of events that will be materializing over the remainder of the year? What am I looking out for?
Well, I think the big ones are really the start of drilling. So, we're going to have aggressive drill programs in place on both that Dumbwa target with KoBold and the first quantum thing that we're doing up at Me2 and Kaziba. And so basically, I think we're probably, not to put a specific timeline on it, but we're probably end of summer, middle of August, somewhere in there, we're going to start drilling, maybe end of July. But we're going to get drilling here fairly shortly. And the amount of money that we raised 10 million, started out at 3.3 million back in March, ended up closing a $10 million financing. That covers all the drilling that we need to do internally for the oxide targets over the next year, 2 years, really through the entire process that they need to move forward. And then at the same time, we've gone and put this deal together with KoBold, and the $15 million number was not something that we came to arbitrarily. It wasn't as though we looked at it and said, hey, let's do $15 million in drilling. Sounds like a good number. Maybe we'll find something. If you look at the Domes region, every big deposit has taken about the same amount of drilling to unlock. It's 40 to 50,000 meters. And that $15 million number that we're doing in drilling is going to get you that 40 to 50,000 meters to unlock that target. And, we didn't cover on too much detail about why that target is so important. But I'll give you just a little quick bit of context. There's a 20-kilometer long soil anomaly on Dumbwa. So basically, we're seeing something that has a surface expression of 20 kilometers that is beyond ore grade in soil. So it means that copper is so high grade at surface, it's higher grade than what most of the mines are operating on in the area. The other thing is we see vegetation kill zones along that target, and the only place they see that is at Kamoa-Kakula and Tenke, which are the two highest grade deposits in the area. And basically what it means is this is an area that has lots of vegetation and nothing can grow because there's so much copper in the system at depth. And then there was a big discovery made at the south tip of that property about a year and a half ago by another operator. And we know that the area is there. So KoBold has the best geological team in the world. They hired David Broughton, who discovered Kamoa-Kakula and Kansanshi. And then we've just hired a fellow named Kevin Bonnell. And Kevin was working directly beside Mark Bristow at Barrick, developing Lumwana. And he was brought in by Barrick to develop the Lumwana mine. And in 24 months, he built 25 years of reserves. Like, incredible. Discovered 2 new deposits. He firmly believes, as do the KoBold team, that Dumbwa has the real deal, has what it takes. So they're running the drill program, best geological minds you could ever have on this project, and attacking it properly with all this drilling. So from the prospect, or from the terms of what the milestones are, kicking the drilling off at Dumbwa, kicking the drilling off at Kaziba on the oxides, and then the formalizing of an arrangement with First Quantum of some kind. But I think between that and drill results, it's going to be a big, busy year for us with a lot of news flow.
Well, Adrian, thanks for hopping on here. I think you got a very, very interesting project. It's not another one of the many hopeful porphyry projects that we've talked to that exist in the usual locations that never seem to go anywhere. You're clearly elephant hunting, and from your drill results, it certainly looks like you guys have something. So hopefully you'll come back on here in the future as you continue to prove this out and build $1 billion company.
Yeah, I look forward to it, and not in the Philly cheese commercial next time.
Thanks, Adrian.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.